So the practice specializes in art. This is our projects world, which was installed at F5, a corporate office in Hyderabad. It specializes in engineering. This is a huge Infinity logo installed outside a residential complex in Lucknow. It specializes in the construction of technically challenging projects. This is a process picture of a huge scorpion installed at an exotic landscape garden in Hyderabad. Exhibition pavilion that started with an idea of maximum volume utilization in a very limited space. A very good example how a complex figure could be broken into smaller and simpler rule sets by the use of computational design. Now, the pavilion was made as a part of the exhibit design at India Design ID, which was held in February. So starting with a very simple cubicle mask, the whole design was carved through a step-by-step process. We started sculpting the target space to achieve an interesting form, trying to meet all the parameters at the exhibition: good circulation, structural strength, minimum material wastage, assembly time, and cost efficiency. The result was this: a parametric tubular shell. So, what has been the impact of computational design in your work? How different is this from industrial design and traditional fabrication methods?
First of all, I would like to share this thing with everyone that computational is actually not a design tool. It is a development tool, like we use pen and pencil. But the more we work with this, the better we get at this. And slowly our mind gets attuned. Like just the way we sketch, we can use these 3D tools to develop our designs. So what computational design tools really does is that, first of all, it lets you explore higher boundaries of design. Sometimes because there's a lot of data and we are not able to really uh, uh, envisage everything in sketching as well. As well as the biggest advantage of computational design tools is actually speed. So whatever we do conventionally gets really fast. We can test a lot of ideas. We can simulate geometry in an environment where we can test structures. We can design the whole work process from starting to the execution, and things related to budget. So everything becomes very precise, and we can really control the outcome of the project. So that's how things have really changed. And the biggest advantage of computational design tools is that it lets you work on a single project. So in an industrial design project, it's essentially there's an economy of scale. So unless you are working one thing multiple times, it is not practically feasible, because for each and every component you have to create dies, and there are a whole lot of processes. And in traditional method where we're doing a lot of handcraft, there is a limitation of scale, because once every material has a certain limitation in terms of size. So once we have to make something which is on a bigger scale, let's say 10 feet or so, then that is the time you will require reverse engineering. And that is when these computational design tools and parametrics come really handy, because we can reverse engineer everything, make patterns, and fabricate them.
Really keen to be understand. I wanted to know actually about the structural aspect of the parametric kind of design, and the way in which you can arrange the computational system entirely into certain components of structure, and then do a corresponding share it with the structural designers. So that is very imperative and important, what I feel. I wanted to ask you, how do you manage, or have you looked at certain works where the structural designer also is part of this entire team?
Actually, so I understand where you're coming from. I think where we are handling a lot of these big space frame structures like that, where the secondary intervention will be required, not just, I mean, it's easier to handle a small scale installation like this pavilion that we just did. But I think that's where the whole automation part comes in, where the parametric developed model and the BIM can come together and integrate those structural elements with the design. But yes, it has to come right at the design stage, and I think it is our responsibility to see through that. We can communicate this whole thing with the structural team and come up with a tangible solution. And right now there is a lot of interface happening between the two. I mean, there are structural teams which are actually specializing in this parametric space to help architects to make things possible.
All right. So while talking about form and optimization, let us for a moment go back to the origin of forms. Next, please. How does nature design its forms? And more importantly, why is it relevant for us to understand it? For those of you who are new to the term morphogenesis, it is the biological process by which natural forms develop their shapes. What you see here is an African termite mound. These mounds are tall for the size of a termite, almost 350 times their size. Or if I put it in perspective, like a 125-story building for a human being. Now, we do not intend to copy or mimic these shapes. Next, please. Absolutely no, because that would be stupid. But what we want to decipher is the process and implement the learnings. So if you see this next image, backpack. If you see the image on the right, it is a gypsum cast of the hollow space within a mound. It shows the structure and nature of porosity they possess. These are tall chimneys which let the mounds well ventilate itself. Not looking too much into the design because that requires a different discussion in itself. The first learning I want to stress on is the form-performance relationship. All natural successful forms achieve a particular performance. We can call it a design goal or an intention that can be numerically measured. In this example, the termite mound achieves natural ventilation with the use of change in ambient temperature.
So a series of modules were tested by the technique of folding, and then they were analyzed for reverberation. So over the series of my research, these were some of the parameters that I kept on giving variation to achieve an optimum of form for my reverberation time. So I was giving variables at acoustic level, geometric variables, and kinetic variables to obtain a best possible system inside an auditorium. So this is a final module which opens up and closes at various angles. If you can see, these are the various angles it is opening and closing. And in the side view, side simulation, you can also see there is some type of difference in the suspension height. So this module was then kind of assembled in a ceiling system and analyzed for reverberation time. And as you can see, now the same module, same setup gives me same different modules opening at different angles, impart different reverberation time, and hence prove to be the optimum solution for my research. So that's the assembly in a ceiling system.
Okay, and now, so the units were developed. Now to further kind of look at how these units could be organized at each level, the concept of cellular automata was explored and understood. And in this, this concept, by defining a certain rules of adjacencies, like how two units can come next to each other, each floor can be designed. and analyzed further. So I will just give you an example. So for this, I took a grid of 9 by 6. Then certain voids were created. Then the built and the semi-open spaces were defined. Then these are the unit typologies, which, as I told you before, were kind of designed. And the remaining spaces, these, as you can see, these semi-open spaces were either converted into green covers, or they were they are the spaces where you can further build if and when the densities kind of increase. So this was basically a system where you could define the relation between semi-open space, green space, incremental growth, and the built volume.
Radhika, I was very curious to know that you've been taking this various studios at colleges. So how do you think this entire series helps students in developing better forms or helping them produce better designs?
Yeah, so I think there are some of my students here and they might be better able to answer this, but the thing is, actually, I take this studio with undergrad students and we're doing it in the urban design field. What it helps really the students is to develop a methodology of thinking. How do you break down the problem statement into certain goals or intentions? And then how do you approach the whole process as a series of logical parameter-based outputs? Now, so that's one thing that it helps them with. This process, while you are doing it, I should say that it requires actually more amount of time and effort from a student's side than if you were doing any other kind of design project, because it is process based and you are, like we said earlier, you are designing the process. You're never designing the product. The product emerges out of the design that you have or the process that you have created. So one of the questions that I always keep getting is about these parameters are always talking about quantification or numbers. So what about the qualitative aspects? As architects, we keep on talking about spatial qualities. We keep on talking about other such things. And so these are the kind of challenges that students also deal with. How do you, first you understand the process. By the time you understand how it works, the studio is almost done. And then I think you begin to then comprehend that if it was a spatial quality, is there any method of putting it down in numbers? So there are projects where this has been done. So I think the more you understand it, the better it becomes eventually. So the most important learning would be the methodology that this kind of studio offers.
To works of architecture, again during this lockdown, I was able to sit down and finally bring some of my favorite projects from the past and the present into a single kind of table, where a lot of folding has been employed by the architects and the designers in the creation of the projects, some of which are kinetic facades, some where a modular curve fold system is used to modulate the amount of light which goes into a building. In some cases, the grid is used as a strategy to create solar panels on the facade and also control where you see views onto the street. In some cases, it's a modern day stellation on an ancient Gothic roof. And in some cases, the function is a tent, which is a simple to use and multiplicable form so that you can create housing or a kind of habitation of multiple modules very quickly. Some other examples where the purposes are aesthetic or structural where radial formations of tessellations in churches or in stadiums, large spans where you don't want to put columns in the middle of the space, but you want a column-free space. And in all of these specific kinds of geometries which are deployed, for instance, here the second and the third row show you the Yoshimura diamonds.
It's origami a parametric process? And how does fold or a folded geometry help us achieve multiple complex forms? Origami forms can be physically folded in a suitable sheet material. This can also be done digitally, where we input the properties of the material we intend to use. Physical folding helps us understand material properties, the forces, the pinch points, and helps us get a hang of its geometry. Whereas digital folding, once scripted, is very fast. It helps us iterate base patterns, making it useful as a form finding tool. The base folds remain the mountain or the upfold, and the valley or the downfold. These folds have additional properties which are, as seen here, include theta or the angle of fold and the length of its creases. Parametricizing a pattern. Here, I'll be explaining through a pattern known as Muraori, a pattern named after its discoverer. The parameters include the sheet size, which is AMM by BMM here. The sheet material, which is essentially the material which they decide to choose based on the architectural application, and the sheet size ratio, which is A:B. The input pattern geometry, which has a systematic layout of the mountain and valley folds. Here, the red lines depict the mountain folds and the blue lines depict the valley folds. Zooming into the pattern, each cell has few other tangibles, which include the vertex angle, which is angle V here, and the cell edge length A or B.
Clint started out with a design idea which was to be fulfilled with origami. Through a variety of patterns and iterations, we were tried to achieve a curvature which was eventually achieved in an iteration which is a mixture of the Yoshimura pattern and the Muraori pattern. The iterations were tried. So here you can see for the pattern, how the percentage of fold determines the form that is achieved. The iterations were tried in a pattern of 6 by 6, which was broken down into 6 modules for the purpose of fabrication. While the prototyping was going on, we noticed that the twisting that was required in the form was going to be a challenge with the rigidity of the material. At this stage, kirigami was introduced into the structure. Kirigami served 2 purposes. One, it provided the material flexibility to twist the form at this point. To twist the form, and secondly, for the concave structure, it allowed air to pass through. To conclude, the Song of the Earth and the Sky is a deformed Yoshimura pattern, wherein it's a mixture of both the Yoshimura and the Muraori. Flexibility has been achieved in a denser material by introduction of kirigami.
If you could help us know a little more about Auritecture and how has the journey been till now?
In India, it's a new path that is being carved. So it's definitely something where we are hacking down bramble and wild bush and creating a new street for other people to join. So making the path seems, I mean, it's always interesting. Of course, you get a lot of thorns because the pathway doesn't exist. The interesting thing is that there is a lot of research going on independently and disconnected in different parts of the country. But there is no common umbrella like the US has this Origami USA. In India, you have a few groups like there is Origami Mitra, which is active in Maharashtra. There is the Japan Foundation in Delhi, which is got some activity going on. And there are some architects who use the folding techniques in their works without saying that it's a folding technique, or without saying that it's origami, but it's all kind of happening in little silos. And my idea is that all of these people should actually come onto a common platform, talk to each other, form networks, and help each other, because that's the only way that this kind of thinking, which is a networked or interconnected kind of thinking about folds, can move ahead.